Tai. I am a student of the Adaptive Leadership Framework and also a colleague of Professor Ron Heifetz. It is my honor to welcome you all to tonight's event. This event is about a fabulous panel of speakers, a fabulous book, which is luckily for sale and signature by the authors after the event. I work closely with Professor Ron Heifetz. He is the founding director of the Center for Public Leadership here at the Harvard Kennedy School. His course is often ranked by alumni as the most influential and useful course years after they graduate. And it is no doubt, it is that way because he has trained hundreds, if not thousands, of students on building adaptive capacity in societies, businesses, nonprofits, and sometimes even people's personal lives. He is also a cellist, a physician, and my favorite person in this zip code. Professor Alexander Grashow is particularly known for his expertise in teaching the adaptive leadership framework in different geographies and in different formats. He loves traveling to Japan, and he is actually a serious Japanese printmaker. Professor Marty Linsky teaches press, politics, public management here at the Harvard Kennedy School. And he, when he's relaxing, runs marathons, 9 marathons to be precise. Finally, our moderator for tonight is Professor Dean Williams, who is very interesting because he has a lot of international expertise. He has worked closely with the governments of Madagascar, Australia, Brunei, East Timor, and Singapore. And he is known, one of his students recalls that he said in his class, they will get you in the end. So on that interesting positive note, I will hand it over to him.
Okay. Do I need this mic? Because we have one. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Don't need two. Okay. This is a real treat tonight to come together to celebrate the birthing of this book by these three gentlemen. Adaptive Leadership, the Adaptive Leadership Handbook. What's the subtitle? How to Change Organizations and the World?
We'd keep it modest.
It's How to Change Organizations and the World. So this is kind of a very bold assertion in regards to the value of the book. But having read the book and having worked with Ronnie on and off for the last 20 years, back in 1985 I was a student of his and have been a colleague here at the Kennedy School over the last decade teaching adaptive leadership, and before that consulting and teaching in this field. I can attest to the value and the importance of this work. And Ronnie's first book was Leadership Without Easy Answers. I don't know how many of you have read that book, but that was a seminal contribution to this field of leadership and put the adaptive leadership framework on the map. The first book to deal with the distinction between leadership and authority and technical work and adaptive work. The book is interesting, but it's also difficult to plow your way through because it's presenting a whole new framework. And together, Marty, who's been at the Kennedy School also, I think, for 20 plus years or thereabouts.
1979.
Since 1979?
Most of these people weren't born yet.
So he's also been involved in politics in the state and teaching adaptive leadership and thinking and writing about this for a long time. And together with Ronnie, they wrote a best-selling book, Leadership on the Line, that talks about the dangers of exercising leadership, particularly on very difficult and demanding challenges. And the demand for this work is so great, they've created a consulting arm, and Alexander manages that and is also one of the consultants inside of that. And together they've come together to put together this new book. on the Adaptive Leadership Handbook. And it's such a valuable contribution because so many people I know who come to me and to our courses are saying, yeah, this is great and I appreciate these ideas, but what can I do to learn more about this? What can I read to really build the skills to be able to master this material? So this is their night, and it's an opportunity for you to ask whatever questions you have. We have some microphones around here, and after we just have a brief chat, you'll have the opportunity to go to the mic and say whatever you like or ask whatever you like. And we'll have about an hour of conversation, and followed by a book signing. And those of you who want to buy a copy of the book, there's actually some copies here tonight as well. So, let me begin with Ronnie. Why this book, and how does it differ from the other books that you've written?
Each book has been an effort to, each book since the first has been an effort to make more practical a series of ideas that seem to have some purchase and value for people out in the real world. In fact, the ideas themselves were generated in the courses that Marty and I have been teaching here at the Kennedy School for years to people in our mid-career and executive programs, like many of you, who have a lot of experience and a lot of stories to tell from their times of succeeding and failing, as you know from the courses that you teach as well. And from these courses, being challenged by students' own cases, over time we began to develop a theory or a model, a framework to interpret the kinds of complex dilemmas that people find themselves caught in the midst of and need some tools to make sense in a practical way of those complex situations. So the first book was really a 10-year effort to begin to come up with such a framework, and then the subsequent book that Marty and I wrote was an effort to get closer to where the tire hits the ground, more practical. And then this recent book is an effort to take that much farther, much closer to the area of practice, so that people reading the book can begin to get the new book, building on the experiences that Alexander and Marty and I have had together, consulting and parachuting into various organizations across sectors and in different geographies to apply these ideas in real time and in very tough situations. So that was the purpose of the book, to give our readers a chance to bring them to at least whatever progress we've made so far in rendering the ideas applicable and practical. And it's not the end of the story. I mean, we're learning every day. We've even learned quite a lot since the publication of the book itself. So it's an ongoing process of continuing to figure out how to apply these ideas close to where people live. But that was the point, to make this stuff accessible and practical, almost to the point where you could read the book and teach yourself through a series of reflective exercises how one could begin to practice leadership in this way.
Okay. Let me ask Marty. As we look at the amount of books out there on leadership, there's an awful lot. And probably destroying half the world's forests publishing books on leadership, and so it seems.
Buy it on Kindle.
Buy it on Kindle. There you go. So the question, why another book on leadership? And by that I'm asking, how is this book different from what's already out there? Not from your own work per se, but how does this push the frontier of our understanding of leadership?
I think what we've tried to do, other people would judge how successfully we have, is to make it deeply accessible and practical. So we start from the assumption, among other assumptions, that leadership is an activity that's available to people independent of position. And so while the book is written with an eye to that idea that no matter where you are in an organization, that you have the opportunities to exercise leadership. Our experience tells us that people need to think about how to make that real. What do you do tomorrow? What does it mean to try to exercise leadership in the middle of a meeting? What does it mean to try to exercise leadership in taking some initiative in an organizational life? And so what we've tried to do, and I don't think this is anywhere near the last word on that, is to try to make leadership accessible to people so it's not something you see in the movies, and it's not something you imagine, but it's something that's tangible and real that anybody can do if they have the commitment and passion and will and work on the skill side.
Okay, good. Let me ask Alexander. You're dealing with two academics here.
Some people would dispute that around here.
Some people would say you're wrong by two. Some people would say you're wrong by one. But very few people would agree with that.
Well, there you go. Well, they're different from you in some strange way. So
Older.
Okay. So maybe you're all cut from the same mold, I think, probably to do this work. We're all,
Shorter.
yeah. So, I mean, what do you bring to this in terms of, I mean, you've got a consulting operation here, and you have to be concerned very much so with the practical application of this material. Certainly we are in teaching it, but we've got a little bit of leverage. You've got to play around with ideas, but if you're consulting to a company, they want to know how this stuff impacts the bottom line. Are you saying, even promising, as you engage in consulting assignments, that by virtue of this model, and if they adopt and practice this adaptive leadership framework, particularly the ideas in the book, that it can make a difference in bottom line outcomes?
Thanks for getting me out of the question of what it's like to write a book with these people.
Yeah, I'm going to be back to that.
First of all. I mean, I think the premise of this book is that the future is going to continue to be unstable, and that prosperity may come back in our experience of working with clients, but and so that question of what do you do if that's true? How do you operate in instability? And so part of what we're offering is the opportunity of how to do smart risk-taking, how to run smart experiments, and how to negotiate the competing conversations that are either within the organization or the ghosts that exist in the boardroom of either the founders or the sort of people who started the company. And so I think it's more a promise of how to experiment and innovate smartly than a promise that tomorrow is guaranteed to be better.
Yeah.
I don't think we're into noble failures, but being on a journey with somebody through a process that's going to be difficult is part of what we're trying to offer.
Okay, thank you. Now let me ask Ronnie this one, and then we'll open it up to the group for you to ask any questions. Teaching leadership, as you and I do, the MLD 201 or PAL 101 course, it's a very demanding learning experience, experiential exercise that the students go through. And it's critical that they participate for the full duration of the course, that they do all their assignments and reflective activities to kind of come out at the end with some insight in regards to leadership. Through reading a book, can somebody enhance their capacity to exercise leadership? How do you cognitively take them to a level where they can see themselves and see their institutions and these complex systems better and be able to intervene in order to mobilize people to face these tough challenges that you talk about?
Well, what we try to do in this book is to get a little closer to, by inserting at the end of each, first of all, unpackaging the ideas so that there are shorter chapters focused on each idea in a more practical way, but then to provide various kinds of reflection exercises and experiments to run in one's own professional setting so that you can kind of learn to work the ideas in real time, one at a time. And in that sense, make it a little bit more like a workbook than than an ordinary book that's just a narrative. I don't think we can reproduce in a book what you reproduce in a living design, where you're working with people face to face, and you can sense where they're at, and you can modify how you operate moment to moment depending on the responses you're getting from people, or where they can learn from the dynamic amongst themselves. Whereas in a book, it's really an individual's own experience with the material, and even if they have a reading group, it's not the same as what we can design in our courses, where people work their own cases together. So I think there are limits to what you can accomplish in a book. But on the other hand, our sense is, from people who've read our works over the years, that the book can help. It can get people started. It can begin to give them a new way of thinking, or a new set of things to try out, new ways of operating to try out. And maybe that ends up leading to various kinds of experiences that they put themselves into in terms of their own professional development. Indeed, in our consulting work, as well as in our teaching work, some people are attracted to our work because they've come into contact with these books, your book or our books, and they want to learn more in an experiential way. So I mean, there are limits. You know, every format has its design. A 2-day workshop is limited compared to a 3-month course. A 3-month course is limited compared to a 2-year curriculum where you've got 10 courses to work with. You know, each framework has its own design parameters to try to maximize the educational value within that structure. But there's still a yield. You know, the yield may not be 100% of what you can, but there's still value to be produced.
Okay, very good. If anyone wants to ask questions, we've got the mics there. Just kind of gravitate to them so we see who you are. While you are gravitating, I'll ask Marty another question. Marty's got a marvelous blog, by the way, on the Cambridge Leadership Associates website, where from time to time he'll talk about current events and the leadership challenges facing the world. If President Obama read your book, which hopefully he will, because he's certainly someone with great promise, a lot of hope. We've all got the hope there. So what is something that would resonate for him, that he could really take and use, particularly as he's, you know, putting a whole bunch of problems in front of the country at this particular moment, maybe overwhelming everybody with what he's trying to get done and generating a lot of opposition in that process. So what are a couple of key lessons that would be useful for somebody in high political office as they think about exercising leadership and not just being the quintessential stereotypical politician of...
Don't say it with such a sneer. I think Obama has actually embodied some of the ways of being in the world that we would encourage politicians to do. Whether he's got everything right and got the right balance or not is a different question, but there are a couple of things that intrigue me about him. One is, for example, I think his attitude toward trying to deal with the economic turmoil. I think it's kind of ridiculous to think that Obama and the people who work for him have the foggiest idea what to do to fix the economy. He's relying on the same people to try to fix it who got us into this mess. And so it feels to me what he's doing is running a bunch of experiments. Now, he can't stand up and say, good evening, my fellow Americans, I don't have the foggiest idea to how to deal with this problem, because we don't want our authority figures to do that. But in effect, I think that's what he's doing. He's running a bunch of experiments, and one of the things that it's fun to watch is that when one of the experiments doesn't work so well, he cans it. When it seems to be working pretty well but could be worked on, he tweaks it a little bit. When it seems to be working really well, he shoves some more energy behind it. Well, that's one of the ideas that I think is quite at the heart of what we're talking about, that it's not as much about solving problems as it is about running experiments and monitoring them really well to figure out what works. If you're dealing with an uncertain world and in a new world, then there are no smart guys that know the answer or smart women that know the answer. There's just a spirit of experimentation. That's one thing that I think he's doing. The second thing that I think he's doing, which is that he is disappointing people, making some hard choices, although I would suggest that he hasn't made enough hard choices. He's making some priority decisions about the promises he's made and the constituencies that supported him as to which ones are really more important to him than others. Let me give you one concrete example of that. He ran on a platform in which he espoused, espoused transparency as a very high value. Best as I can tell, every time transparency has come into conflict with some other thing that he cared about more, he sacrificed transparency. Well, I think that's perfectly fine, because I don't think it's worth sacrificing health care or Afghan policy on the altar of transparency, right? I think, and what people in trying to exercise leadership have to do is to make those kind of hard choices among priorities and not kid themselves that they're in favor of everything. I think we start from a position that you only really know what you care about when it comes into conflict with something else you care about. So I see him wrestling with some of those things. It seems pretty interesting to me.
Okay, very good. So with the questions, just tell us who you are and where you're from. And that's fine. Just go ahead. We've got our media people here. They'll figure it out.
My name is Leland Shaw. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I'm in a joint MBA, MPA program between MIT Sloan and the Kennedy School here. My question is for those of us who haven't yet had the chance to buy the book, can you summarize the framework for us? Thanks.
Alexander, go ahead. Do the 2x2.
Buy the book.
Yeah. Well, buy the book. We part of we for the whole framework of the book. So I'll start there with the idea that one of the reasons that change doesn't happen is because diagnosis isn't done sufficiently. So we spend half of the book trying to think about diagnosis. One of the ways to answer the question before about what's the point of the book is we had a lot of people coming to us saying, okay, I get this idea of being on the balcony, which is this idea of diagnosis or reflection in the midst of action. What do I do when I get up there? And so the part of the book is trying to tell you what to look at when you look at organizations and competing commitments and the songs and the messages. So we looked at that both from the diagnostic point, and then how do you intervene? How do you raise the heat and hold people through a process? So there's diagnosis and action. And on the other spectrum, we're trying to think about both how do you look at it from a systemic point of view and how do you look at it from an individual point of view. So that 2x2, diagnosis and action, and then look at the system and the organization, and then individually is sort of the framework for the book. And it walks you through a set of skills or ideas about how to apply those things in that framework. The part about the individual really takes the idea that an individual is a system unto themselves. And how do you understand the competing interests and values and behaviors that my parents let down to me and my family and what's continuing on, and understand all those voices. So that's one way to think about the organization of the book.
Thanks. Good. Okay. Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Chase. I'm an alum of the Kennedy School and of the Center for Public Leadership. And I trust that all the people on the platform know how much affection and respect I have for them and their work. That said, for white males are talking about leadership and changing the paradigm of leadership. And I love your work. I've studied it. And so it's sort of a subtle question I'm trying to get at. If you weren't for white males, could you cause the disequilibrium in the paradigm of leadership that I think you are? How important do you think about that? Do you consider that as you reflect on your consulting and on your writing?
Wow.
Well, we we like guys. What can I? We just kind of like guys, you know what I mean? But I think that the change in orientation to the practice of leadership that we've been teaching people and working with people to explore and experiment with is a pretty significant shift in orientation, as you know better than anybody, you know, having collaborated with us on programs on school leadership. And I do think that the authority that we bring to it enables us to hold people's attention to the possibility that there's something valuable here than if we had no platform of authority from which to operate. And that platform of authority has several components. The first and foremost is Harvard. Harvard is an extraordinarily authoritative platform. People are here from all over the world because of the credibility of Harvard. And people graduate here wanting to have their ticket punched from Harvard because of the authority it then lends them when they go back home. So that immediately has given us an enormous advantage from a marketing point of view or a influence point of view, in at least getting people to consider that this change in orientation is worthwhile. Whether or not being a guy or a white guy helps in that, my guess is it does as well, because white guys tend to inhabit most authoritative roles, at least in the United States or in Europe, which has been dominant for hundreds of years until really just recently are there real competitors for political or military dominance or economic dominance. So my guess is that it has helped, in line with what you're thinking, both that we're white guys and that we're using Harvard, that Harvard's been a hospitable platform for us from which to explore these new ways of thinking about leadership. But embedded in your question, I think, is the sort of the rock inside the snowball, you know. And I take it seriously, the challenge, which is what in our perspectives, what are the blind spots in our perspectives that come with the territory of bringing along for each of us the baggage of mindsets, heritage, and testosterone that leads us to see the world in a certain way, different than perhaps, at least in a statistical sense, many women would tend to see the world. It has been my sense over the years that there are aspects of this theory that are much easier for women to learn than frequently than for men to learn, and there are other aspects of the practice, the theory of practice, that are easier for men to grasp than for women. For example, in distinguishing leadership from authority, that is often a much more challenging idea to men who are deeply invested in the notion that by virtue of having competed and succeeded in gaining a high position of authority, they are now a, quote, leader. For a lot of women, they've had a lot of experience in practicing leadership without authority for eons, for generations, across cultures around the world. On the other hand, the notion that conflict is a resource and a source of creativity, a source of innovation, is fairly comfortable to men who will beat each other up on the playing field or in the courtroom or in politics or in business every day and then go out for drinks afterwards because they know that the fight isn't personal. Whereas for women, the conflicts frequently seem more dangerous and therefore less inclined to see conflict as a resource than an impediment. So, I mean, those are just generalizations, but I do think that we've tried to have a perspective on leadership that seems to be acceptable at a minimum to many women who are trying to practice leadership, if not useful.
Thank you.
And I also acknowledge that there are probably inherent blind spots, and maybe you guys can identify the blind spots that
Well, it was interesting. I remember when we wrote Leadership on the Line that one of the friends of ours who we asked to read it was a woman who is at the Kennedy School who read it with that set of glasses on, and it had enormous impact on the book. So I think I agree with what Ronnie said, and I think your question is quite right. It's my experience also, as it is his and I assume Alexander's, is that there is something to be offended at in these ideas, whatever your gender. And we've heard from people on those dimensions. There's a, I was thinking as Ronnie was talking about the working across boundaries, which is a really important core idea that we work with, which is much more comfortable for, in my experience and observation, for a lot of women than a lot of men. Right? So I think that's a great question, Sarah. Thank you. And,
Thank you for answering
Yeah.
it so beautifully.
Very good. Thanks, Sarah. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Nick Regas. I'm a mid-career. I'm currently taking your course planning on taking the January course. I've learned a great amount of information in your class currently. A lot of great concepts. My question is, when we go back into the workforce, how do we take those concepts and ideas and put them into practice without creating a lot of damage
to yourself or to others?
to the organization and to ourselves, too, as well?
Well, I think, first of all, it's naive to think you won't take any damage. And the question is, which damages and which casualties are you taking? And so how do you spend the time yourself understanding the challenge that you're bringing to the system? We think of this work as being both inspiration and perspiration. And so what's the hard work and sweat you're going to have to put in? But our hope is that you're going to spend the rest of your life taking more risks and having casualties for something that's important and negotiating those along the road with the others that are around you. But our hope is that you're going to be aggressive and assertive in that question, which I think is a right question, not just for the moment, but hopefully for the rest of your career. We find that in doing work in these organizations, the easiest thing to do is tell yourself that there's going to be casualties, so I'm not going to do it. So we're constantly trying to, in our work more and more over the years, is not talk about just the risk-taking, but the purpose and value proposition. And how do you get people more in touch with what's meaningful in their life? And how do you live that tomorrow more than you did yesterday? So we think it's a lifelong question that we're still asking ourselves. Is hopefully the work that so many people in this room are pushing the frontier on.
I mean, we try to help, particularly in this book, which is more practical than what you've read in my course so far, to be smart risk takers and to be thoughtful about the nature of the risks, to run small experiments rather than become overly invested in rolling out prematurely one big idea, so that it minimizes the casualties. But we would all agree that that it's unlikely that you're going to be able to bring the casualty rate to zero or take the risks to yourself or to others down to zero.
Which helps explain why we don't exercise leadership more often than we do, right? Because I think intuitively we understand that you can't exercise more leadership than you do without taking more risk than you've been willing to take in the past. And that means there's always a possibility of both damage to others and damage to yourself. It goes with the territory, and that's why having a sense of purpose seems so critical to us.
You also use that the terminology adaptive leadership. And what does adaptive leadership mean versus the guy who's out there to get it right all the time, to kick the winning goal? Adaptive suggests that there's a slower discovery process going on. And so the trial and error, the experimental element of that is absolutely critical, ultimately with the aim of getting that winning goal, right?
Yes, it's experimental and iterative, both. You're constantly trying stuff, you're monitoring what you're doing, you're making mid-course corrections, tweaking what you've done, watching very closely what's happening, and deciding whether to move forward some more, take a right turn, or move back.
Sinead.
Sinead O'Flanagan, from faculty at the Sloan School of Management. And my question is, I know there are a lot of people here who are asking themselves, how do I go out and do this in my own work, in my own world? And I know your approach also talks about the system. When you apply adaptive leadership, then the system works to restore the equilibrium. So my question is, those of us who are thinking about how do we do something with this, we know that if we push, then we get the system swinging back at us to restore equilibrium, and that's quite daunting. So you've experienced it, and I'm wondering what nuggets do any of the panel members have for those of us who are out there and maybe pushing the boundaries a bit and knowing that the pendulum is swinging back, like it is maybe for Obama, too, as he tries to make changes. What nuggets do you have to share on that?
Don't take it personally. Well, it's not a trivial point. I mean, begin to be able to, is the way Alexander was talking before about reflecting in real time, beginning to interpret the pushback that you get. We don't think you can exercise leadership without meeting resistance. And I don't think that every time you meet resistance that means you're exercising leadership, but I think the reverse is true. And beginning to interpret that resistance, no matter how it's framed and how it's come, first of all, be able to see it coming, which goes back a little bit to your question, to be able to see it coming. And then to be able to interpret it as a sign that you're doing something that's challenging some deeply held values, and not to take the pushback at face value, because it's often framed as a personal attack. It's often framed as you're a jerk, or you're terrible, or you're the worst boss I ever had, or the worst employee I ever had, some personal attack. And to be able to interpret that not as a personal attack, but as a signal that you represent something threatening and important to the person or the faction or the organization that's coming back at you. I think that's really, really important. It's a lesson that I certainly wish I had learned a long, long time ago.
Thank you.
Very good.
There's a different, one of the things in our consulting work that we find we do more at that point is helping people mourn loss. That we talk about this work, people aren't afraid of change. They're afraid of loss. They're afraid of giving up the way they've learned to be in the world. And so that pushback is them resisting that loss. So holding people through a process of mourning, of letting go, is a thing we're spending more and more time on. Because if we don't do that, the impulse to keep it and desire to keep it is really strong.
Okay, great. We'll go here, then we'll come to you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tricia Keller, and I'm an MPP2. In my understanding of the adaptive leadership framework, a key part of it is giving the work back. And I'm wondering in your consulting services how you balance the need for deliverables with giving the work back to your clients and having them do some of that.
There's a lot of pushback on that. But we're often brought in, actually, after a big consulting firm has given people a terrific plan and nothing has happened. Because they expected that the plan was going to do the work. So it is a balance, and I don't know if it's fair to tell this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. The first time Ronnie asked me to do a piece of work that he had, an outside piece of work, I went to his office for some advice. It was a piece of work he couldn't do because there was schedule conflict, so he asked me if I would do it. This must be now close to 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so we went and talked about the client, talked about the situation and everything, and then as I was starting to leave, he said, "There's one thing I want you to remember." He said, "These are clients. You don't want to piss them off too much." And I think that was an important insight. That is that part of the way we try to work with people is to see how hard you can push on that dimension without having them disengage. And that's a very subtle process in which we find ourselves constantly trying to read the environment. It is quite typical in a multi-day engagement that on the first night, a group of people go to the senior authority in room and try to get us fired. So we make it a standard operating procedure to talk to the senior authority about that in advance, so she or he is prepared for that. So instead of being surprised by it, they actually anticipate it.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a few questions, so we just kind of run through and go ahead.
Hi, my
But
name
again,
is...
just maybe a last thought on that. I mean, part of the theory is that to pace the work, pace the rate at which you give people back work. You know, I mean, you don't have, a parent doesn't throw the keys to the car to a 6-year-old child and say, go do the shopping. You know, you stretch people at their, right past their, to the point where they can stretch. So, you know, the listening hard to where people are at, and then to push them to be able to take increasing levels of responsibility for tackling problems that seem overwhelming to them. And to pace that process is part of the theory. And in a sense, then we've got to practice that ourselves with clients who are overwhelmed in the face of the challenges at their own doorstep.
But the place we get fired most often is that problem. Is when our own ambition, what they should do, is greater than their own. So when we listen to ourselves too closely, that's when we get in trouble. And it happens all the time.
You don't get fired all the
I get
time.
fired all the time. But it's really hard, especially as a consultant where you don't have someone in a classroom and they have to be there for a semester. Where the payday is on the other side.
I mean, from his perspective, the problem certainly much.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Carmen Burbano. I'm a mid-career here at the Kennedy School. I work for the United Nations, and I came to the Kennedy School to think about a new way of thinking about development, which is what I've been working on for the past several years. And as I go through the semester and as I engage with the different professors in the Center for International Development, but also in the Center for Leadership, it seems to me that there's a consensus about something that I already suspected, is that development work and donor work and aid has failed miserably in the past several decades. You know, billions of dollars being wasted and very little to show for it at the end of the day. And as I move forward, I seem to think that there are a lot of connections between your framework of adaptive leadership and what are some of the conclusions that are coming up from new avenues to think about development. Professor Danny Roderick talks about creating an open architecture for processes where countries can identify solutions and problems and solutions to those problems. Or Professor Hausman talks about a self-discovery process within countries, etc. So it seems to me that there is this awareness now that one of the reasons why development has failed is because it's been treated for so long as a technical problem rather than an adaptive challenge. And I'm wondering if you have made that connection of the value of your framework for work in development, both in the theory and the practice of development, and if you're thinking about moving forward on that.
World Bank.
Well, I think we have, I've had encounters for years with people in the World Bank, and we're currently in the process of working up a larger project with the World Bank that over time, and other development people. But I think the best person to answer this question is Dean, because Dean's gone off himself and spent years living in the field, working on the degree to which these ideas apply or don't apply in some of the toughest development contexts. So, can we pitch it to you? Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this work is relevant and applicable to international development. And you are right, it's a critical piece that's been missing. And so I've had the opportunity of working with the country of Madagascar over a 5-year period in doing this work, and we made extraordinary gains, culminating in a coup d'etat this year. And so we all got killed off in the end, so including the president. And so we really kind of pushed the boundaries, but for all sorts of reasons, things erupted that we weren't able to contain. But the lessons from that experiment have been extraordinary. And so I'm trying to write that up myself and to extract the lessons and what we missed and what worked. But you're dealing with enormously complex systems, multiple systems in which embedded are other systems. All these competing factions with their own understanding and appreciation for what that work is. So it requires multiple people to be able to exercise leadership and to appreciate this stuff. You cannot do it alone. Part of our problem was we only had a small group. And we had a president who tried to do this work and struggled, but the politics was so ugly in these countries, and you've got to contend with that. And so there's a lot of lessons to extract and apply to international development. And I know people are coming to these three here asking for help and support, and certainly to myself and others. And a lot of our students work in international development, and they're out there in the field applying these lessons. So clearly we've got to do more work there, but very important work. Yeah.
We were just two quick examples. We were in the conversation with the bank trying to, as we do with clients, see which orthodoxies we could test and see what the adaptive work is. And they have a policy of not engaging in politics. Amazing that the World Bank and all that they do doesn't engage in politics. So what would it mean to test that? What are the significant risks on the other side of even beginning to question that orthodoxy? We worked with one of the largest emergency relief food organizations with P.O. Doherty for a number of years, who were perfectly happy to spend billions of dollars giving out food and doing God's work, not being political. Mm-hmm. And so the question of to begin to work at the roots of poverty, they'd have to begin to be political. And how that was an affront to their sense of identity was a difficult conversation to hold them in. And Hugh was one of the best at sitting in the fire with folks in that moment. But it was a very difficult, long work. And I'm glad so many people are concerned about the problem you're asking.
And part of the challenge here is for these international institutions to step back and say, we're not the experts.
Exactly.
Because they bring their Harvard degrees, they bring their training, they bring their technical knowledge, and they want to get results, they want to get things done. And when you're in a terribly poor country and you're so educated and have so much money, yeah, you appear to be the wise man, or at least they make you think you are that. And so, they bow down and they say, teach us and help us and give us things. And you get seduced by that. And so, time and again, you see these international institutions trip over themselves in their noble desires to help. And so to be able to pull back and to conduct these experiments and give the work back to the people, which is a critical term in this adaptive leadership framework, is important. Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Kim Leary, a graduate of the Kennedy School, and my question is about what you've learned from your students. As Maryam reminded us, you've taught collectively many thousands of students, and I'd be interested to know which of your ideas and in your framework, what bears the imprint of the transactions with your students and the executive ed programs, the teaching you've done at the Kennedy School, and other places where you've been taking your ideas?
Well, my students have taught me to be a kinder and gentler teacher. I'm a lot nicer now than I was 27 years ago, although it's hard for people to imagine that. You're asking a serious question and a great question, and it's almost impossible to try to summarize an answer or do justice to the question off the cuff. But I'm serious Alexander mentioned before that we're in the business of engaging people in losses as well as gains. And to the students, the losses involve losses in ways of seeing things, losses in the way they understand the world or the way they've operated, losses to some degree in the lessons they carry from their own heritage or their own mentors or teachers, the loyalties they've had to their own ancestry. And sometimes I can be too insensitive in the ways in which I cut close to the bone in challenging people to suffer a loss and entertain a different way of thinking about things. So one of the ongoing streams of lessons for me has been, or ongoing questions over the decades has been, how to deploy my own capacity for aggression usefully. Aggression is not a bad thing. It's not but to deploy it in a way that's skilled, in the same way that a surgeon cuts and there's aggression in the cutting, but the cutting is highly disciplined, not sloppy, the way somebody who is aggressive wielding a knife and doing damage, or only damage. So, that's been an ongoing series of questions, and I work on that with my teaching assistants, as you know, because you helped us a couple of years ago in chairing our teaching group, helping me figure out, when I move too fast, when I cut too close, and when I then go home, that's the struggle for me is in figuring out how to deploy the particular intuitive capacity I have to see things and name things maybe too early in a person's own process to see those same things themselves.
For me, it's, I don't think I would have thought of this without hearing the question, Kim. It's optimism. I'm just overwhelmed in the classrooms with people's continuing commitment to try to make a difference in the world. And it keeps me optimistic all the time, which I think is really important.
Alexander, do you want to add anything to that?
That's pretty good.
Okay. We'll just stay with these three because we don't have a lot of time, so go ahead.
Thank you for arranging this session. It's been very informative. My name is Mir. I'm a student of Professor Heifetz, who's the most interesting professor I met, the only one who can teach a class when he's not even physically in the classroom. My question is regarding human nature and your teachings. Our work at the center, orienting value in many ways, is driven by fame and fortune. But we learned at the course and through these books that leadership is mostly about taking yourself out of the stage, out of the limelight. And in many ways, it's about giving up your authority and throwing back the problem to the people and making them champions of the problem as opposed to you being a champion of the problem. So in many ways, it's about leading through questions as opposed to answers. So in this context, it indicates that adaptive leadership asks the leader to give up fame and ego, and with that, maybe even some fortune. Is there an inherent conflict of interest with human nature and your teachings?
I think human nature is very complex, and it is in conflict with some. If it wasn't in conflict with some powerful aspects of human nature, there wouldn't be any need for this work. So I think you're right. It is in conflict with some power, and very often we find ourselves pushing against people's preferences and desires and wants. So I think that's a very perceptive comment, and it helps me think about the nature of the resistance and where it comes from. So the answer is yes, from my point of view.
I also think part of the work, what we're doing, is trying to have a conversation about what wealth means, and trying to explore tangible wealth to intangible wealth, and begin to get more color and definition of what intangible wealth might mean. And so it's just a way that I think we're sort of ourselves beginning to understand that categories of question.
But I don't think quite as much in, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, the lust for power, fame, fortune, recognition, and the practice of leadership. I think one can sometimes fuel the other. It depends on how well it's disciplined and how one meets various trade-offs, different moments in time. There's a difference between delighting in being significant to people, delighting in one's own centrality in a process and mistaking your centrality for the work of the collective work in the organization or in the society. So some people begin to think that the whole game is about their own promotion. But I think one can have as a benefit, personal benefit, from promoting the welfare of people and mobilizing collective engagement on collective problems. That one of the outcomes of that might be that you become more famous or more significant or more wealthy. And that then in and of itself can become one's own dilemma. You know, it can become seductive, or if properly managed and deployed, it can be just the next resource for getting back into the game and doing good for people. So, you know, I'll just reflect on my own experience. I enjoy being significant here amongst students at the Kennedy School. And I take pleasure, personal pleasure. I don't think I'm without ego. I think I take a lot of pleasure in that I have a name and these guys would call it a brand, and and that a reputation, and that people seek out my courses and they want my signature, and I take pleasure in that. I don't deny myself pleasure in that. I don't say to myself that the ideal is to be an ascetic where I take no pleasure in any of those things. I do take pleasure in it. On the other hand, I try hard not to make that the name of the game. I try to keep at the forefront the purposes of doing good as best as I can on behalf of the students. And if it has that side effect or that added benefit, then that can be wonderful. At the same time, there are seductions to becoming a charismatic authority or a quote guru on a subject or a significant mentor or teacher, because it can generate dependency, and that can become its own peril as one becomes seduced into the dependency and reinforces the dependency. So, again, one can take a lot of pleasure in the benefits that come from becoming more powerful or more authoritative or wealthier or more recognized, as long as you have the personal wherewithal to keep it disciplined so it doesn't become its own distraction.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hello, Pukar Malla. I am MPA, first year. Thank you very much for your insights. I just bought the book and look forward to reading it. I wanted to understand the adaptive aspect of this better. So between a vision that eventually we want to translate into impact, the individuals hold various values, and then they use a series of methods to arriving at their destination. The adaptive portion of this book, is it more about the values and how they transform over time, or is it about the methods that individuals use in accomplishing their goals? And in your views, which one is more important? Thank you.
I don't think that this is a normative conception of leadership. It's not value neutral. So we don't take any client's goals and say, apply this practice to achieve any goal. This particular set of practices would require people to engage in thinking through again or rethinking the goals themselves, the quality of those goals, the quality of the outcomes those goals would have if you did achieve them, whether or not those goals are defined to really address the underlying problem for which those goals are imagined solutions. Because usually goal definitions are already built into those, are assumptions about a solution to a problem, and getting people to work backwards to, wait a second, what's really the problem here? Helps reality test the quality of a goal. So at least that's what I'm getting from your question. We don't start with people's goals as as sacrosanct and then simply apply the theory to help them reach whatever goal there is. We use this theory to help people check out again and think through in a methodical way, a systematic way, the quality of the vision itself.
Yeah. Okay. Big question, but thank you. Good.
Hey, Lauren Gary from the Center for Public Leadership. A question and a plea, if you will. First of all, I really appreciate the way this book shines the headlights farther down the road from building upon the first two, the 2x2 matrix, Alexander, that you were talking about of diagnosis and action and self and system. And it makes me wonder: does this complete the arc of the theory in your minds, or if there's further advancement of the theory, where do you see that? Where do you see that leading? Where do you see yourselves being led in that? The plea or the request is that I actually, although I haven't finished reading this, I come away a little bit worried that this further development of the theory of adaptive leadership will be taken or construed as a technical fix. And where I think where my appetite is most whetted in the book are these, passages where you're talking about engaging from the above and below the neck, and speaking from the heart, and deep listening, and speaking musically. That gets at how we prepare ourselves to lead, not just in advance of a career, but every day in our lives where we have a chance to lead both formally or informally. Word on the street, Ronnie, has it that your next book is about the spirituality that underlies or surrounds leadership, and I guess that's the plea. I come away from the reading so far wanting to hear a lot more about that. Leadership is some sort of, you seem to borrow a lot from contemplative traditions or from this sort of, an apophatic understanding, like listening to music is. It gets at some sort of wordless understanding that you put as a part of leadership. I want to hear a lot more about that too, and maybe that's the next book.
We had one of the longest conversations we had was around his table. Think about what soul meant in that word. And so I think there's an incredible opportunity to continue the spiritual work and multiple dimensions of the edges of this frontier. I don't think it's any necessity that we do that. But I think there's large opportunity to define a number of holes in this book. It's quite uneven, I think, in some of the application of the ideas in the different chapters. And then the other question is, where is the real integration of this and all of the other models that exist out there? Where does this fit with emotional intelligence and negotiation? I think there's incredible opportunity to push that frontier more collectively. What Ronnie and our next book is something I'll let them talk about.
Okay. Well, I'll give each of them just an opportunity to say something as we end here, and if they want to kind of elaborate or build off that, of Lauren's question, they can do so. But also, it kind of relates to that. For me, it's an important question as to why are you in this field anyway? It's not, just to write a book. And what attracted you to this field of leadership? Why are you in it? Why are you pushing the boundaries the way you are? And what do you hope to fulfill and accomplish by doing this? Marty.
It's a really hard question, and there's several different pathways that it leads to or that stem from it. I think my most noble answer to that is that I'm just amazed at how many people are out there trying to make the world a better place, and the idea that in some way we can be helpful to them lets me sleep at night. There are people so many people doing what we write about. The more glib answer is that I wanted to see if the three of us could write a book and stay friends afterwards.
And are you still friends?
Well, actually, it's wonderful. The first time I ever wrote a book with someone, it ended our friendship. And many of you probably know the book Getting to Yes, which is a kind of a classic story of a collaboration that ended a friendship, and I was quite involved in that.
Marty edited that book because these two guys couldn't figure out how to collaborate on editing it down, so they gave it to Marty.
The only successful collaboration they had in the last stages was not paying me very much. They agreed on that. But I think it's, as we tested in Leadership on the Line, and again on this, I think it makes me feel wonderful that we went through this process, which was often really, really difficult, and I think came through it on the other side much closer than we've been before.
Yeah, very good. Alexander?
There's a lot of reasons. As the father of young children and trying to look out at the horizon of the world, there's a part of me that wants to be helping figure out what to do next, because I have some concerns about the reality that we don't know how to solve the world's problems. And so being part of a community of these gentlemen and the other people in our firm and the people in this room who are all pushing that frontier is a wonderful way to spend a life, but also feel like I'm serving my kids.
Mm. What was it like writing the book with these guys? Did you feel like...
Not enough time.
It was obviously a privilege, and just as much work as the preparation and perspiration that we do with our clients.
Very good. Ronnie?
I feel so blessed to get to hear the stories of students every year, and that they are willing to share in the classroom and with me real dilemmas that they've experienced in their careers, and have honored me with the opportunity to try to make sense of those, to try to provide advice or helpful frameworks to think them through. And every year it's just so wonderful for me and feels so like such a blessing. But I also feel blessed just by some of the people in this room who put this thing together as an enormous act of generosity. Paulina Perepelkin, my assistant, and who works at the Center for Public Leadership, who put all this thing together, an extraordinary piece of work with Louisa Pellerin, who has been a friend and colleague for years, and Donna Calico, who's Executive Director of the Center for Public Leadership, and made this possible. So I really want to make sure we thank them for their efforts, because this has been a real joy for me, and I know for these guys.
I don't want to end on too... I don't want to end on too sappy a note, but on the subject of people who put this thing together in the broadest sense, there are 10 family members of ours in this room.
Oh, yeah.
Catherine Herring, and Ani Heifetz, and Milton Heifetz, and Betsy Heifetz, and Ruth Linsky, who celebrated her 96th birthday last week. And Maren Linsky, and Lee Linsky, and Robert Linsky, and Rachel Grashow and her fiance Ken. Thank you for being here and for making this happen.
Okay, it's been a great night and a great conversation. These gentlemen are going to be out there signing your books, which we hope you don't run to eBay and sell them for a great price. But one day they will be worth a lot, I'm sure.